In this video, I want to discuss how to create a shape tween and some important things to know about using them. Shape tweens, as the name would imply, would allow you to draw off one particular shape and have it morph into a new shape, and then have the computer do all of the work to create the frames in between both of those. Here's what it would look like. Let's say I had something simple like a square on this very first frame, and then we went down to our timeline, and a few frames later we added a new keyframe. And in this new keyframe, we wanted that square to turn into a circle. Now it doesn't necessarily have to move in position, but you'll see the first set goes from a square, then it will go to the circle for the next keyframe. To make a shape tween, simply right-click on the first keyframe, and we're going to create a shape tween between those. Notice that it'll give you an orange arrow between your two keyframes. Now the computer is going to interpret all of the frames in between the shape 1 to shape number 2. So you can see how this would become very handy if you've got some very complex shapes that you had to morph or to transition. This is particularly used whenever you have to change a shape and doing a simple free transformation doesn't cut it. So if you're doing something more than stretching, squashing, rotating, or distorting, if you actually need to redraw a secondary shape, this is where shape tweens come in handy. Now there are some limitations to using shape tweens, and it really depends on the complexity of your drawing. Let's say, for instance, we want it to go now from a simple circle, we'll move over a few frames and add a new keyframe, to a more complex drawing like a squiggle. So in this case, I'll grab my paintbrush tool and I'll draw off a squiggle of lines. So now I want it to go from here to this shape. If I was to create a shape tween, I can do that. You can see it still gives me my arrow, but the computer is going to do the best job it can to interpret all of the lines and shapes in between, and sometimes it gives you some results that are unexpected, even though it is technically correct. So shape tweens are usually used very sparingly, simply because sometimes you get some results that you cannot predict. And if this is the case, usually a frame-by-frame animation would be the most recommended way of creating those in-between shapes. Another common problem with using shape tweens is the tween will act very unpredictably. Let's create a new layer and I'll just work on this new layer from there. In this one, I'm going to draw off just a simple line going from one side, and we'll even have it arcing on this first frame. But by the last frame, I want to have it arcing the other way. So from here, I'll insert a new keyframe at the very end. I'll delete away this one, and we'll redraw it on this side and have it arc the other way. So it's going to go from here to here. Now, if you were to predict how would it animate itself from that position to the other, there's lots of different ways it could come into mind. It could be arcing from the left side to the top, all the way over, having the bottom stay still, or it could rotate one way or rotate the other way. If I was to insert a shape tween between both of these, let's see what the computer interprets. In this case, you can see it's just rotating it this way. So that may not necessarily be what you want. Let's say I really want to have this bottom portion stay at the bottom and the top portion simply flip over to the top that way. To do this, we may need to add what are called shape hints to give the computer a hint about where each point needs to be. In this case, I've selected the first starting point, the first keyframe. We'll go up to Modify the Shape and we'll add a shape hint. Notice Shift-Command-H is the keyboard shortcut. When you do this, this is going to add a little red dot to whatever object you have selected, and these red dots are going to be labeled with a different letter, usually in alphabetical order. So we need to place these on here. I'll place point A at the top, then I'll go back up to Modify, Shape, and insert or add a new shape hint. And this will be shape hint B, which will be down at the very bottom. So we did this to the first frame. Let's go to the next keyframe, the very last one. You can see those little red dots are starting to show up here again. Now I need to place them in their corresponding spot on the line. But I need to work backwards. So here's shape hint B, which was down here, and here's shape hint A, which was up here. Now when I tween between both of them, this gives me results that looks like this. Well, at least it's not rotating it from the bottom portion up to the top like we had before. It is using those shape hints to appropriately add it where it needs to be. The problem is I want this to arc up and then over, not straight across. To do this, I really need to add one more keyframe that's in between and tell the computer where to modify between both of those. So to do that, I'm going to remove my shape tween for now. I'm going to select my middlemost keyframe, hit F6, and I'm going to draw the middle between here. And if it's helpful, sometimes you can turn on your onion skinning so that you can see where it is in between both of those. So from here, I'll grab my line tool and I'll draw in between both of those. There we go. So it should be straight up from there. Now I can go back and add my shape tween. We'll do it again from this first one to the middle. In this case, you can see it's actually working correctly. Let's go from the middle back down to the bottom. We'll insert a shape tween between these two, but this one is the one that's messing up. You can see now it's tweening this way, which is actually giving me some really weird kind of results. Again, sometimes shape tweens are simply not predictable, but we can use our shape hints. Selecting the middle frame as our starting point, we'll go to Modify, the Shape, and we'll add a shape hint. In this case, you can see that it remembered the last two shape hints that we had before, and this is not necessarily what we want. So I'm going to go up to Modify, and I need to just clear away these and start fresh. So we'll go to the shape again, and let's remove all of the hints. From here, it's also remembering the last hints on this one, so we'll go to Modify. There's none there. Looks like it's probably the first one. There they are there. So we'll modify and we'll remove those shape hints too. Now as we move, it's right here that we want. Selecting that middle frame, Modify, Shape, add a shape hint. We'll place it here at the bottom. And then I'll do Shift-Command-H, which is the keyboard shortcut, to add another one. We'll place it up there. We'll move to our last position. Let's place both of these where they belong to. Now with those in place, you can see my animation is moving much better like I want it to. Now that was using shape hints on a simple object and having it use compound little movements between multiple different keyframes. Let's do something on a more complex object. So I'll make a new frame here, and I'm going to use just my simple drawing tool. So I'll use my pencil tool to draw off, let's say we had a blob on one side leaning this way, back to the middle. That'll be our first keyframe, and we want to have him leaning the other way on the other side. So we'll insert a new keyframe, and delete away what we have, and then have him leaning over this way as he moves over. If we were to do a shape tween between this shape and the other one, this is the results that I'm getting. Obviously not what I want. This is the top of the head, and I want it to lean over as it moves down and keep the bottom roughly the same. So let's use some shape hints to indicate where the bottom needs to be for this monster. We'll go up to select our first keyframe and Modify, Transform, Shape. Let's add a shape hint. I'll add one to the bottom left side, then Modify Shape, and I'll add a shape hint to the bottom right side. We did that for the first keyframe. Let's go to the second keyframe. We'll do it to the bottom right side first, and then the bottom left side, because those both correspond. Now when it moves, aha, it's getting even more complex between these two. So let's go back and add more shape hints. In this case, I'm going to indicate one for the right side, left side, and the top. So Shift-Command-H was the keyboard shortcut. There's C on the left, Shift-Command-H, there's D at the top, and Shift-Command-H and E right here on the right. Again, we'll go to our second keyframe, the very last one, and we've got to do it backwards. So here's E on the right, D on the top, and C on the left. Now when I tween between both of those, it's giving me the shape action that I want it to do. I want it to bend over that way. So you can see sometimes it takes multiple shape hints in order to get your shapes acting and working correctly. The final word I'll say about using shape tweens and especially using shape hints If for some reason Shape Hints and Shape Tweens isn't giving you the results that you want, it may be best to either redraw your first keyframe or your second keyframe until you get the results that you want, or go through and do a frame by frame drawing of exactly what you want. Sometimes these results are simply unpredictable.